our session here for T20 Soho Routers. Hopefully all of you had some coffee, brought your oxygen tanks while we go and take a deep dive when it comes to Soho routers. Obviously, Soho routers now come in wireless and wired format. They connect all your computers to the internet. Most homes and small offices have this device to be able to facilitate the connection to the internet. The actual ISP most likely is cable or DSL, in some cases even satellite or even dial-up, depending how far you are from the actual ISP. In this session, you're going to learn the difference between wireless and wired routers, how to set up the routers themselves, and how to solve the actual common issues that may occur. By the end of this session, our ultimate goal is to be able to compare and contrast the internet connection types and features, compare the contrast between Wi-Fi networking standard and encryption types, explain the roles of a router and describe the differences between a wired and wireless routers, describe how to install, configure, and deploy them, and identify the common pitfalls when you're installing them, and obviously identify common problems that may come up with the actual Soho routers. Lastly, we'll be able to describe how to solve the common problems that may actually come up. There are multiple ways to connect to the internet through wired or wireless connections, depending obviously your ISP and who you have to connect to the internet. There is 802.11, which is the standard IEEE standard for wireless LAN, which we will cover in this chapter. And it has multiple versions of encryptions available, depending obviously on your taste for risk or appetite for risk. A router is a device, as we mentioned before, that allows multiple computers to be able to join the network and to get out to the network. He will represent you out on the internet. Installing and configuring these devices would be obviously a must for us. Even if we're not in these small home office, we need to at least know in the large companies to be able to install physically the devices and where they should be. And what's the most important thing here? Persistence is a must, obviously. And in when it comes to network, anything that has to come with network and troubleshooting the network, you're going to need persistence, and communication is key with everyone that's helping you out, because you're going to most likely, sometimes if it's not on your end, you're going to need to be able to communicate with the other person on the other end and clarify exactly where you believe the issues may land, and obviously document everything so that if and when it happens that you need to turn it over to someone else, they're able to. What is the internet? Ronald, help me out. You can help me out here, please.
What is the internet? The internet, guys, the internet is a global system of networks that links billions of computers for communicating, sharing information, and resources. It consists of millions of private, public, academic, business, and government networks linked by a broad array of electronics, wireless, and optical network technologies. Physically, the internet is a huge TCP IP-based network, physical mesh topology, and traffic passing through a complex system of routers.
Thank you. But we need to understand, obviously, the internet is every single router that's publicly out there, although they themselves may not be your company, they're there to service the internet. Therefore, they bounce traffic from here to there. This is inside all of the PSTNs or whoever your ISP is. If it's cable, they route it through their routers. They pass and have already purchased their own gateway through this fiber optic network in the world. They are the ones that are responsible. If you need to get to Asia or if you need to get to Australia, they have the capabilities of making sure that they get you there. How do they get you there? Is they have those connections, physical connections throughout the world, and they release you eventually. When they have that ultimate door that goes anywhere on the internet, they release you. At that moment, they have no control of that packet. It goes across any mesh network there and it gets to the other end. As I stated, all these tables are configured on the routers. Every single router knows every possible route that he can get. Any questions about the internet? Collection of routers out in the world using public IP.
So those routers, they're mostly hosted by like independent government organizations and research things on the right and the like, right? I mean, I think the standards are just created, but all sort of independent. Is that correct?
Well, for instance, your router at home, you may not know it, but your router may be at home may be being used to route traffic. It's on the internet. You
I
do
guess I'm
realize
talking
that
more like I'm talking more about like the internet backbone kind of.
that's what I'm telling you is anything that's connected to the internet, that's physically on the internet, that's a router, they all talk to each other and have capability updating what they call the open shortest path first, OSPF. Or if it's MPLS, it has some other routing decisions to do. So they're checking on who is on the internet, who is here around me, who can I send this to? If I get too saturated, eventually that packet will go through a different router. Although it might have came through me first, but at that point, that router is faster. So the internet automatically routes it to the other guy to make sure that there's no uh, saturation on the network or any bottlenecks to be able to get the packet there. After it gets out to the internet, that's why it's called the Wild Wild West. The TCP or the TCP of the actual connection is the one that helps you guarantee that if it didn't get there, it retransmits because it's bouncing from router to router. Now, your ISP has their own internal network, which you'll see if you ever do a trace route, for instance, to Google, that it always routes through that backbone, their internet backbone. As soon as they have their door to what is the real internet, they release you and you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different IPs. And eventually, when you're getting to that location, what we consider the last mile, the ISP, the internet service provider, it jumps back onto their network backbone. And now it gets routed to the actual destination. So the internet is there to provide a service to everyone. It's public. Therefore, all routers that are public on the internet route traffic. That makes sense? Yes? No? Okay. And that's why a lot of companies ensure that they create a intranet and only allow maybe specific routers or doors that go out to the internet to be able to ensure that they're much more secure than allowing every single facility in their business having a direct door to the internet. For instance, in UPS, there was, if I remember correctly, it was Atlanta, Mawa, and Louisville in the United States. Those were the three doors to be able to get to the real internet. Still remember when we first started off, it was an 8 meg pipe. I always thought that was cute. Yes, for the whole United States, 8 megs. That's doesn't sound right now, right? It just doesn't sound right. But obviously, those were the days when circuits cost too much money, and we couldn't have that in a 1990 something. Circuits costed a lot of money to be able to open these circuits. Questions or doubts on the internet and what it is and how it does its job? No? Maybe so? No questions. All right, cool. So, my internet connection types themselves, as we see, we have dial-up, we have ISDN, we have DSL, cable, fiber optic, we have satellite, We have cellular G, right? The 4G, 5G. G means does not mean gigabyte. That's generation. 2G, 3G, 4G. In that little name, that's what it means. In reference to tethering with mobile hotspots, hopefully all of you know what that means. That's basically opening up your actual mobile phones to be able to do a hotspot. You could also obviously do that through Bluetooth, depending if you have the actual proper software. The other types which we have, and I mentioned plenty of time, is your POTS, which your PSTN gives you the POTS lines, is the plain old telephone service or dial-up. My friends, that's the ice cream truck. We'll pause here for 5 minutes and we'll continue. As for POTS line, obviously that's the original, least expensive and the slowest connection that there was for those that probably remember Yahoo. Yeah, well, they might remember the dial-up. Obviously, this is not as faster as DSL or any other ones that are available, but there is locations that are still using this, and believe it or not, there is still locations in the world who are currently using a pigeon as the internet. Yes, I just said a pigeon. Unfortunately, there is no connection in that location, so therefore it is faster to actually, instead of using a POTS line, to actually just slap a USB stick to his legs and then obviously send him on his merry own way. Any questions on the, hopefully everybody remembers what the POTS line is or what a telephone line looks like. That is as simple as it gets. That would be the RJ11 jack, and it would be a V92, which is the latest or last modem standard, V.92, which gives you, I believe, up to 128 something KBS, more or less. Now, trick question for everyone. Why is it that no matter what they tell me my speed is, there's no way that that's ever is going to be my speed? Let's say I'm on Ethernet. Maybe somebody read this in the book and hopefully can give me the knowledge. If I'm on Ethernet and I'm 100 megabytes, why is it that I can never get 100 megabytes? What happens?
That signal is shared along the backbone to all the other users too. So you can have times, it depends on the amount of users on the line at the same time.
I'll give you that one too. There's one more key thing that happens. Let's act like if there's nobody talking except for me and you in this network. What do I have to do to be able to create this communication? What happens? It creates a what? A tunnel, right? It creates the call. As soon as it creates that call without sending anything eats up bandwidth. Just establishing the call eats up bandwidth. Make sense? That's what they call the session. When you have a session up and then eventually it drops, now obviously the call drops. Even here, you are susceptible for the exact same thing. So when you dial up, you'll have the exact same problem. So if you ever get a question on a test where they're telling you maybe the user and you're trying to explain why, it would be most likely because of the actual establishing the connection and bringing up the tunnel. That's where the speed is getting. Now, ISDN. ISDN again is using the PSTN, your public switch telephone network, to be able to establish, but this one is a digital technology. It has multiple 64 KBS channels. That's 64 kilobits per second channels. And those are known as I think those are the D channels, right? And the other one is B channel, which is the one single one itself. As for the main thing is understanding, obviously, that this is usually on basic rate interface or primary rate or PRI or BRI. There is a detail of each one and their signaling types and their use. Usually in the United States, the majority of them are PRI, and in what we call Europe or Latin America, you will usually find the BRI being used. Questions? Now, this little thing usually has a fancy modem, which will actually be able to make the connection and bring you up. But it is a digital per se type modem compared to your plain POTS modem, which is analog signal. This will be digital signaling. Any questions? Usually you use this for backup purposes and or to be able to bring up a network in a remote location if the actual circuit is too expensive. In reference to the other types of wired network cabling, we have your DSL, which is the digital subscriber. You have obviously your ADSL versus your SDSL. Can anybody by the name, or maybe if they read, know the difference between the ADSL and the SDSL?
I remember that ADSL is asynchronous and the other one is synchronous, and it has to do with the data rates. The asynchronous is less bandwidth on the upload.
That is correct. That's where what a lot of people have at home. They usually have the asynchronous DSL. A lot of the business who want to pay for the money will pay for the synchronous DSL, which now guarantees the same as the download to be the same as the upload, mimicking like if I have a circuit now, but I'm paying for DSL service. In the circuits, when you pay for it, you pay to be able to transmit. For instance, a T1 is a 1024 kbs. You'll be able to download and upload at that speed. But obviously, for the purposes of trying to save in bandwidth, the telco usually sells you at home ADSL.
Yeah, the speeds they advertise is the download speed, not the upload.
Any questions? This again is using POTS lines to be able to send the actual information.
Hey, Diego, on the second one, cable internet, the POTS line is why it has to convert it to an analog signal. Is that what?
Which one? In this one? No, I haven't gotten to the cables yet. We're still on DSL.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Sorry.
Yeah. Any questions on DSL before we proceed to the next section? As for the next section, the cable internet, that one will be your actual cable, your Xfinity, Comcast, any cable provider using the coaxial up to your location. Obviously, a lot of these people, even the actual telco, now a lot of the times to the actual distribution box. Who is this distribution box? I'm pretty sure you guys are used to seeing that little bell guy with the phone, and he's in front of this big green box near your house. It's about yay high, about maybe 3 feet high, and you always see him messing around in that box. That box right there is usually where your copper ends. From there, you're most likely nowadays going fiber from that box to the actual telco. All right. So the cable people do the exact same thing. They bring cable as on the last mile, and a lot of times they have fiber optic nowadays to be able to facilitate it. But what it is to your building, it's always coming in the coaxial. Can somebody give me what type of cable would that be? From what we learned, what R cable is that? What type of coaxial cable?
Would that be RG6 or RG59? RG6.
I think it's RG6. That's the thicker cable, right?
Somebody got to tell me.
That's my guess.
But obviously, if I told you that they were using R49, would you choose that choice?
Probably not.
That's not a choice, is it? So we got to just remember at least that 58, 59, and 6 are the only valuable choices. And then obviously practice a little bit and identifying which ones, from what we learned, 58 is not being used pretty much now, is 59, right? And then variance between that and the other, which I believe 6 was for radios. I could be remembering it backwards, but I could be remembering it correctly. But hey, Anybody has that or want to bing it while we look up this next area? Any questions about the actual cable? So it's coming in with the cable signaling, just like on your TV. So whatever you're watching on TV, it actually comes on that exact coaxial. I find it very amazing that one coaxial cable can actually transmit at the tremendous speeds. I don't know about you guys, but anyways, questions, doubts on cable modem and how it gets to your house. So in the back of the cable modem, what type of connector will I have?
F type, right?
That is correct. On the back of the DSL, I most likely am going to have an RJ45 or RJ11. The majority of times, they usually have a little special box that helps you be able to clean the line so that you can be able to talk and obviously be on the internet at the same time. Unless if they finally got rid of that doohickey and figured out how to keep the line clean. Questions?
And when AT&T first brought their UVerse service out, they were bringing fiber to the home. The only problem they had, they can only do it in new subdivisions that were being built. So like what they call the last mile. What they call the last mile is the distance from the box that we're talking about to the actual house. So they would run a
That's right.
fiber line. They ran a fiber line straight to the house. So you had fiber going straight to your computer, like that. Well, to the box into your house, like that.
Yeah.
You had to be in a brand new subdivision.
Yeah, it's lucky when we're able to do that. That's it gets much better, obviously, the performance and everything. Now, as always, just remember we're always as good as the slowest link. So it doesn't matter if we have fiber, if we're paying for the cheaper service, we're only gonna get so much because they're gonna purposely hold us back, or what they call throttling, right? Next here is actual fiber optics. That's no line sharing at all here. It's going to be most likely multi-mode, as we said, going up to that distribution box, and it may go from there, obviously single mode to be able to get to the actual ISP. This costs a lot of money if you're going full. That is long distances fiber. That costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
Obviously, that is the fastest that is available. A lot of the internet, or the majority of the internet, runs on this fiber optic backbone. Most likely, for those that are as old as me, may remember the word cross-Atlantic cables. The cross-Atlantic cables are now fiber optic. They're no longer actually copper.
Old term.
That's what they were. Cross-Atlantic cable were all big, humongous mass cables of copper. Now it's all been replaced with fiber optics. Any questions, doubts? So, and that's what I meant when I mean by the door out to the internet, is because, for instance, is it AT&T? Is it still AT&T? I think AT&T was the one that has all the islands. So if you really, really want to get to the islands, you're technically, doesn't matter who your ISP is, you're riding on AT&T's backbone. It was the same thing to get to Mexico, to cross. It was going through Texas, and there's a main pipe that goes across to Mexico. This doesn't go just by some mysterious work of magic dust and get there, unless if you have a satellite. Then, for some weird reason, using your actual radio waves, you're able to transmit, but obviously you're transmitting thousands of miles just to be able to reach your destination. In this case, the maximum download is 125 megabits per second, and upload is 3 megabits per second. Obviously, this is great for remote, very remote locations, but what is delay and latency, that's going to be always. So depending, obviously, how bad the weather is in the area can obviously also, for those that have satellite TV, they know what I mean. You will most likely be very upset if that happens in the middle of Super Bowl and Brady just made his last throw. So that would be very upsetting. But again, these are choices that you have depending, obviously, on where you are and what's available. I had an Uncle Bill who could only get satellite because he was in the middle of boondocks in Atlanta. And obviously, he loved where he lived because he could just come out with his shotgun and go hunting. But then again, everybody has their own choice. And this is one. Any questions on wireless connections via satellite? Just bouncing off any satellite that's out there that's providing that service. This is the internet wireless. Next one we have actually Verizon, AT&T, Xfinity. All these guys have now what they call the G. So now they're bringing up towers. Not only do we have not prior to that we had satellite coverage, we have now the actual cell towers that are giving us internet. Please do not be fooled. As for satellite and as for this guy here, no matter which way, we need to get to either fiber or copper. Yes, I agree. This is going to get you a connection because that is the way you're getting connected. But for those that love to play back in the day and or still want to try to do that nowadays, and you try to ping your phone to see which way it gets, you'll might wind up being in Florida, and it doesn't actually go out of the internet. In other words, it won't get out of Verizon's network onto Texas. So it's bouncing either by tower to tower, or sometimes if some of these towers are not on the mesh and they actually have a backbone instead of just being part of the wireless mesh, they may actually have inside that wireless tower a connection directly to the internet. But not every tower has a connection to the internet. They are part of their own wireless mesh to be able to pass that information to each other. Questions?
I
As
got a
for, go ahead, please.
I don't know if it pertains to this, but I hear a lot of people when they talk about 5G, how they talk about how dangerous it is. What about it makes it dangerous?
Nothing.
The smartness of it is the only thing, and the real time of it. You've probably seen the commercials where people can see that you're typing now. Have you seen that? Where you can kind of live see what's going on one end and the
Yeah,
other.
I
So the,
have.
the network is smart, and at the same time that supposedly that it's smart, it's I
Too
forgot
smart.
what the word
It's
was.
a, it's a little
It's
conspiracy
instant.
sprinkled on that, K9, but that's yet to be determined.
Don't believe the conspiracy theory.
So you
Yeah.
can't buy too much into that. Technology is going to continue to move forward. So
For instance, that's what's allowing a lot of the stuff to with ease. Sometimes, especially if you have Siri turned on and Google, I don't care what they say, but it's most likely to happen to anybody in the class where you're talking about something and you decide you're going to go to Amazon or Google to go look for something, and you haven't even started typing. Either an ad has popped up in the Google, or as soon as you try to type what you're looking for, it's actually suggesting it.
Yeah, that actually happened to a
That's
friend of mine
that's 5G.
talking about it, and it just popped up.
And Google will do that too. We were talking about Mawa, and then we wanted to know how big the size of Mawa and the house costs. So we put M in there, and the very first thing that came up of everything that starts with M was Mawa. Seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I think Siri likes to listen in on your talks.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it does. It has to. Remember, because when you say, "Hey Siri," it's gotta be listening. It's impossible that it's a human that's gonna say, "Oh, that's me." Yes. What happened? No, it's always listening until you say that, and then it will respond to you. But that it stops listening? No, it's gotta listen. It's the only way. It's a computer, right? So they're saying supposedly whatever they're recording, they're not passing it to the government. I'm part of the conspiracy theory, so let's get off this. I don't trust my device. I don't have Google on. I don't have Siri on in my phone. Anywhere. None of those things. I don't trust it. Any questions though? All kidding aside, obviously the 1G means first generation, 2G means second generation, 3G, and then obviously it's little evolutions and where they fit. So the actual 5G can go up to 10 gigabits per second. Not gigabytes, gigabits, zeros and ones. Everyone understand the variance between gigabits and gigabytes? No, yes, maybe. Right? Because there's bits, there's nibbles, and then there's bytes. So a byte is 8 bits. So this is zeros and ones when they're talking to you here. Very key word. Wireless network communication. So we, as we mentioned before, we have our PAN, which is the IEEE 802.15. That is less than 10 meters usually. Your next one would be the 802.11, which is your Wi-Fi. And at, depending obviously the type of equipment you have, it can go up to 150 meters. And the next one is your actual MANs, and that is called the WiMAX usually, and it's less than 50 kilometers. And the other one, which is the WiMAX again for the mobile instead of the fixed one, and that, my friends, can be up to 150 kilometers. And those are the numbers associated with it. Questions? Okay. So those are services that you can purchase. Obviously, another thing that you can do is tethering. As we mentioned before, you can do this. Everybody, hopefully by now, has done that, or if they don't have it, it is a feature on the smartphones that you could just hit a button and it creates your phone into a portable router. Being able to then share your actual 5G or 4G, whatever network you're on, through your actual Wi-Fi antenna.
Not unless you got one of the old unlimited plans.
That's me right here. Metro PCS, my friend. Metro PCS.
Oh, I did with Sprint, but somehow everything Sprint is like T-Mobile now, and I don't know. They're shutting down all their Sprint stuff.
Yeah, T-Mobile bought Sprint.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, but they have unlimited. T-Mobile has also unlimited.
Yeah, but my unlimited $40 a month plan, just I don't get that on T-Mobile. Not when I get everything.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
Back in the day, T-Mobile was kind of frowned upon, though. You know, in the hierarchy of phone services, you're like, oh, you got T-Mobile, you know. So, and look now, T-Mobile
What a
buying
difference a
Sprint.
decade makes. You know?
Didn't they buy Verizon too, or am I going crazy here? I know they took.
No, they did not.
They took Sprint only.
They
Yeah,
only
just
got
Sprint.
Okay, Metro. They took Metro and Sprint. That's
And
what it is.
Sprint acquired Nextel, which I think is
That's
defunct.
what,
So
Yeah, that was years and years ago, like
They did that for-
2009 or 2008.
Yeah, they did that for the technology, that walkie-talkie technology.
Mhm. All right. Any questions on the tethering? Doubts? IEEE standard stands for the Institute of Electric and Electronic Engineers. I believe they will never, ever, 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 ever ask you that question. If they do, you might as well just shoot them. Everybody just knows them as the IEEE. It obviously, its objective is to ensure, and when it comes to the standards of communications, and in here you have the 802.2, which is the LLC for the logical link controls. You have the 802.3, which is your Ethernet standards of communications. You have 802.5, which is the token ring. You have the 802.6, which is the MAN, and the 802.11, which is the wireless LAN. Those are the numbers that correspond that type of technology. Token ring, if everyone remembers, is pretty much outdated and no longer pretty much used in the network. Questions? No. As for your Ethernet, it's obviously what is being used currently throughout the world. Majority of your LANs have Ethernet. And obviously, as we know, it is star mixed with ring or even type of hybrid, depending on how you're setting it up. There is so many ways, depending on how large these facilities, there is sophisticated actual switches that can do layer 7 switching. You could have just regular switches that do layer 2 switching, and obviously anything in between. On the wired standards, you have from the 10 base T themselves, which is a 10 megabits, all the way up to the 1000 base X, which is the gigabit. You have obviously also the 802.11a, B, G, and AC that we mentioned before, which are your standards for wireless Ethernet communications. Any questions on the media types or the speed and or Ethernet itself? All right. We have the wired and wireless connections. As we stated, you have your copper, your fiber optic, be that it is in short haul or long haul fiber, being that the long haul is your single mode fiber and your multi-mode fiber will be for your short haul. The other ways we can obviously connect is through Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or infrared when it comes to wireless communications or mobility. No questions or doubts on the wired or wireless connections. Okie dokie. As for our next area here, if you could help me out, David.
Wireless Ethernet networks use radio waves to communicate. Wireless networks used today are based on the IEEE 802.11 Ethernet standard, which is marketed as Wi-Fi. Wireless networking is the area of networking with fastest over the last years. Understanding Wi-Fi characteristics and installation configuration is essential for every network technician and/or administrator.
Thank you. So, as he just stated, the wireless internet has become very, very critical and is being used so much nowadays that even in your house, most of you most likely are no longer using wired networking. You're using probably wireless. It's much cheaper infrastructure to obviously bring up when it comes to these things. And obviously, they're getting better and faster. It's almost competing with the actual wired network when it comes to the LAN. Any questions or doubts? It's imperative that we actually understand and how well they work and which channels we must use when it comes to the 2.4 gigahertz range, right? Itself, it only has 3 usable channels that we should be using. All of the other channels create crosstalk. And I figured out in my house why I was having a lot of issues because I had to switch to the 5 gigahertz band. Luckily, I went and bought myself another router because some comedian in my neighborhood decided to use channel 5. And that was a great idea. If we look at the chart that we have here, channel 1 starts at this range here and it bleeds into channel 2 and 3. Therefore, channel 2 and 3 I shouldn't use because it bleeds into channel 1. But if we look at channel 2 and 3, you'll notice that they also bleed into other channels. each zone bleeds into the other zone. Therefore, there is a standard to avoid this type of interference and to facilitate the actual installation of these things, to use channel 1, channel 6, and channel 11. That will alleviate the problem and ensure that there is no interference when it comes to multiple APs on your network with the exact same SID and web key. Now, why do I need to do this? Well, this is what's going to happen. Let's say I put everybody on channel 6. I want to make my life easy, right? So, Diego and his awesome drawings. Here we are. So he's on channel 6, right? That's my first AP. I got this AP over here. He's on channel 6. He's on channel 6. He's on channel 6. Now, everything's fine and dandy when I get here. When I first log on and I connect here, everything is beautiful. Nothing's wrong. Now I start walking into this zone over here, and the user's complaining because he's getting dropped packets. As we hopefully understand, APs at that point are not talking in IP. They're talking in MAC addresses. Therefore, at that point of communication, it is all in MAC. I understand there is the payload, which has the IP payload attached to it, fine and dandy, but all I need to talk is in MAC. Therefore, I continue to stay on channel 6 because my radio antenna says that channel 6 is loud and clear, but the MAC address has changed. My channel is still the same. Therefore, I do not need to look for a new MAC address as an access point or as a wireless device. Since I technically have not moved from this area and I have not lost my signal, there's no reason to go and start talking to another MAC address. Hence, the reason then, when you're creating your sites, you should have a channel 1, a channel 6, then a channel 11, ensuring that these channels do not actually repeat themselves. And throughout the building, you make sure that those channels are not close to each other. This one will probably be most likely 11, and I'll leave that one a 6. That way, 6 is never next to each other. 1's never next to each other. 11s are never next to each other. This will avoid those problems and obviously ensure that you have good coverage. There is obviously a distance depending on the type of antennas that you're using, but the most critical thing is understanding the actual channels that you must use for proper installation. Any questions or doubts? So as we can see here, here goes Mr. Comedian. And he's overlapping over here. Where is he? Where'd he go? 2.4. Did he turn off his router? He turned his off. Where is he? He was here earlier. Is that 5 or 6? No, he's somewhere. Where'd he go? There he is. And amazingly, he tried to copy my name, and I know that's not me. Channel 2. I don't know who it is in my little neighborhood, but I know that's not me. I'm over here. Look at me. That's me. I know me. Right there. But that's pretty slick. As you can see, there is people who are bored. And I wish him luck because of the fact that my actual password I've already went and created a password similar to that and asked the internet. And currently, with the actual amount of characters that I have, it'll only take about 2 point something million years for a computer to crack it. But he can have fun.
You don't
I
know
would
what you're
say.
messing with.
Nah, my password is too long. My wife always gets upset when she gets a new phone. She just doesn't understand why my Wi-Fi password is so long. Amazing, I still remember it, but
But
it
now,
is long.
Diego, you just put your phone close to her phone, and then it absorbed that information. Like you just says, "Hey, share this password." At
No,
this
I
point
don't do
now,
that, Pops. Remember that. Come on, man. I never use
that's
that technology. I don't
that's
use WPS and I don't use auto anything. I don't,
this
you're
is
not
true.
gonna catch me. Those are all weak points. Anything that can automate something is a weak point because if someone is close enough or has a strong enough antenna, they can eavesdrop on that communication and they're in. So, but there, that is a feature. That is a feature. I'm the most paranoid technician you'll see, and hopefully you guys go the same route. I
Yeah, I
keep
don't really
myself
use Wi-Fi out my house. I'll use my 4G because it's secure. If I'm in a public area, I'm not going to use the Wi-Fi.
it's much more secure to go to 4G than obviously you're still on the internet, you do realize, but it is much more secure than going to a Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi. Next one here is the actual standards for 802.11a. That puppy is 54 megabytes on the 5 gigahertz. Now, what we need to understand here is hopefully, and remember, please, this is my trick. Anything with an A is 5.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz band. Anything in the middle is the 2.4 gigahertz band. I repeat, anything that contains the letter A is the 5 gigahertz band. Anything that is in the middle, in other words, A, you're going to see is in the outside. You have A up here, then came out B, then came out G, then came out N, and lastly came out AC. Therefore, if you could remember that and they ever ask you in reference to that how they work, that is the band. As for the speed, my friends, that I have no shortcut except for, unfortunately, please remember and memorize. So if they ever tell you which one can talk or actually backwards compatible to each other, any letter that's after the original letter is backwards compatible. It's alphabetical again. So A, C can go backwards compatible to A, right? Because it's on the same band. Now, as for your B, G, and N, again, it's in the order. So G can go backwards to B, and N can go backwards to G or B. Once again, it's going backwards. Therefore, he is talking in his language at his speed. That's what backward compatible means. He actually goes and dumb himself down to that speed. Questions or doubts? Because if not, it will sound like a 45 running at super speed when you really wanted to be at 133. That's a record player, people. You guys remember your little record players. So unless if you want to sound like the chipmunks talking and the other one's like, obviously they're not going to be able to talk to each other, just like in the movies. They both got to be at the exact same speed. And this is why when they say backward compatible and they tell you that they're able to do it, is because they actually go to that speed. They go back down. That doesn't mean that anybody that's on B is going to be able to go to 130 megabytes because they're talking to an N. That means exactly that they will only be able to talk the 11 that B allows you. Any questions or doubts? So, N itself also contains supposedly the 5 gigahertz band to be able to use what they call MIMO, which is the multiple input multiple output. It uses all the actual multiple antennas to be able to send and receive information. You've probably seen these things and they look like if they're a little spider or an ant with the all the antennas that they have on it. Lastly, AC is at the 5 gigahertz band only. And he can go up to a gigabyte. Again, using the MIMO, which is using all the antennas that it has to be able to transmit. Any questions? So just like radios, talk on channels for those people that love the CB radios, just pretend like if back in the days that you were on channel 17 and then all of a sudden you could actually talk to channel 17, 18, 19, and 20 at the exact same time. This is what this puppy is able to do. He's able to transmit on that bandwidth, right? But on several channels at the same time while utilizing the actual antennas, all the antennas that it has. Some of them have it built in, and some of them are very sophisticated and they have those antennas with the little ears sticking out. Questions or doubts?
So that's the reason why you can get up to gigabit speed with that. It's because it's using multiple channels.
In the case of AC, yes, he's using 8 channels. He's bonding 8 channels at the time at the same time, just like bonding circuits or anything else. In this case, he's bonding the channels, the wireless channels, as one big channel.
Gotcha.
It's interesting how they've been able to alleviate the problem and come up with ways to be able to communicate faster, even though they obviously have those drawbacks when it comes to wireless. But by the actual bonding of these channels, now they can actually send much more data at a time. Any questions or doubts? Right. As for the wireless network modes, hopefully everyone remembers ad hoc. And ad hoc mode means exactly that. It would be peer-to-peer mode. Anyone remember what peer-to-peer is? What's a
Person to
peer-to-peer network?
person, person to
Like
person.
computer to computer
Yeah, computer
or
to
device to device.
computer. Yeah. So that's, yeah. Right. Now, infrastructure mode. Infrastructure mode. Now, this is where one or more WAPs or wireless access points connect to the actual nodes or the network segment, the wired network segment. Obviously, it acts most likely like a hub or switch, depending on how sophisticated this wireless access point is itself, to be able to allow you to connect to the network and use all the resources, including if it has built-in capabilities of a router to route you out to the internet. Obviously, this ad hoc mode would impede you from having all that other stuff because we're doing only peer-to-peer. Infrastructure mode is setting up a network for the infrastructure to be able to connect anywhere, including the internet. Questions? All right. Next is the actual encryption types, which is, I always love this word, WEP, wired equivalent privacy, which is the most weakest one out of all of them. So a wireless access point can be configured with a static 40 or 104 bits WEP key. 104 bits. That's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. That's only 104 zeros and ones to be able to crack. of being turned on or off nowadays in the computer, that only takes seconds for me to turn those little bits off and on to figure out what your real password is. It can be compromised in more than 2 or 3 ways. Obviously, there is a way of actually listening to what they call the actual initialization vector, or what they call the when it's first starting. And even if it is what they consider encrypt, after you get 2 or 3 of those, and you're pretty much in. There is videos and ways that you can actually compromise that key, including software that will quickly do it in a matter of seconds. This is the old and original encryption type. It has been most likely sunset from all companies. Obviously, this is only if and only if somehow, somewhere in that facility, it's a must, because maybe the computer or whatever it is that's in that facility only has that old technology. So either we upgrade or we use the old technology as is. The next one, the next generation that came out, which was supposedly 100 times better, yeah, was called WPA, the Wi-Fi Protected Access. This has a dynamic encryption, and you see a new key is generated for each package that's sent, requiring the user to authenticate to be able to before, so you're still putting in the password, and it uses a what they call, since they figured out that it actually wasn't that good, what they call a TKIP, a temporal key integrity protocol, to be able to enhance the encryption, to add more layers of encryption, because WPA by itself was still hackable itself. Any questions? So this is a second level of encryption. It replaced WEP. Now, the one that hopefully all of us are maybe used to, which is WPA2. This uses AES, which is the Advanced Encryption Standard. It uses a 128-bit block cipher, which is obviously a much longer one to be able to hack. When using it, you could also authenticate with an enterprise server. So not only do you have to have the actual passphrase or whatever, but you could also make it so that have to authenticate with the actual enterprise server to be able to get on the network. Most of you, whoever has maybe Xfinity, and you can get onto their hotspot. Has anyone done that? Anyone have Xfinity?
Oh, my mama got Infinity, so anytime I'm around somebody and they got Xfinity, my Wi-Fi automatic connect to theirs.
Correct, because you put her ID and password the first time, and that's basically you're authenticating to that central actual server, or what they call enterprise mode for that wireless, and you're in to any Xfinity in the world. As long as you have the service and you have put already the ID and password, any Wi-Fi spot that says Xfinity would automatically allow. Obviously, if you pick to automatically connect, would be the first thing you need to do. But if any questions or doubts? All right. So here's the review overall. You have your A through your AC, your different speeds, your actual distances. A is the only one that can go only 150. It is the one that is on 5 gigahertz, but you'll notice here at the outer ends, again, you have the 5 gigahertz. Key thing, though, here is that in the end, the majority of the cases, it's very, at least in the new ones, it may be able to talk to A, especially if it has the 5 gigahertz and it's one of the newest ones, it may be able to, but it wasn't, because it was mainly only backwards compatible through to G and B. But obviously, since it has the 2.5 and the 5 gigahertz, as long as it is there, the majority of them nowadays, the last ones that I saw after that, The ones that cost more, usually they are, in some case, compatible with A. It can talk with him. Questions or doubts? None? All right. Role router, as we mentioned before, the primary role is to be able to communicate between you and the rest of the world. It allows the data to flow from one network segment to another network segment. It reads the actual IP addresses. It actually usually forwards the based on the routing tables. As we said, it has a table full of which way it needs to go. If you need to get to Asia, I know I need to send it that way. If you need to get to Mexico, I know I need to send the package that way. Just like when you're getting onto a highway, you know which way you're going because these roads were created and are already there, and you have those signs on your highway. That is already in those tables. It already knows which highway to get on. It knows exactly what route are available to it. Remember, each router has its own predetermined route tables to be able to bounce it to the next nearest router that can be able to facilitate the process. Usually it takes less than 20 hops to be able to get to a final destination. Any questions or doubts? On the left here is the one that you would see is your Soho routers. Can be managed usually yourself. Obviously, the one on the right is much more sophisticated, can handle circuits, while this one here usually is a DSL or a cable Soho router. The one on the right can be configured with VLANs and all the information and security with ACL list and everything you want, even including authenticating with a TACAC server. Any questions? The left for small businesses and houses, and the right one for your actual large businesses. As for your wireless access points, this is usually a wireless centrist node. That's the way that you're able to get onto the network. They come in different colors and or sizes. They can be and are capable of being and acting as switches or even routers if they have those functions built inside. You also have features that are called power over Ethernet. What happens is that on the switch, in the actual IDF or the MDF being the main distribution frame where the telco actually terminates your actual network, IDF would be the intermediate distribution frame or a remote closet. In here on that switch, the Cisco switches, or if you have a special little doohickey, you connect it to the actual switch, you connect that to the little doohickey, who then can actually feed power over Ethernet to the access point so that you do not need to actually throw power all the way up there. I only need now a Cat 6A and above, I believe. Cat 6? Okay. Cat 6, I think, handles power over Ethernet, if I recall correctly, to be able to do this.
Yeah, I believe 6A was the cutoff on that.
Okay, thank you.
So you can
Any
mimic
question?
you can mimic USB with power from like it's the same principle.
It's just power. It's not to USB. USB is a type of signaling, and it does bring power. It has its own little power built in.
Yeah,
Here
that's
it uses most likely the seventh, if I remember correct, is brown. White, brown, and brown is where the power is coming, if I remember correctly. White, brown, and brown.
okay.
Yeah.
So that,
And then there's a flip side to this coin too, where you have you can actually run data over your power lines, which is
True.
EOP, and that's
Ethernet
like a
over
setup like
power.
I have, yeah, Ethernet over power, so they can do it
Mhm.
both ways. You can run power over your Ethernet cables, and you can run data over your power lines. If you have copper
Yeah.
lines, if you have aluminum lines, you can't do it.
yeah, I've seen that before. That's kind of expensive, huh?
No, you'd be surprised how
not
cheap it
really.
is nowadays. It costed me only $100 mine. It's just a
Yeah.
module that's right next to your actual DSL modem or your whatever your ISP is, and you connect an Ethernet cable to your router, and then anywhere in your house, as long as it's on the same circuit, you're not an outside facility. It has to be on the same circuit, the power that's coming in. It'll be able to travel anywhere inside your house. The Ethernet.
And it's like you
power.
have a wired connection. It is very stable. It is,
That was my next
and
question.
then you get really good throughput.
Yes, very decent throughput. Right now, my second floor is on Ethernet over power.
Okay.
It's better than wireless. Trust me.
If you're in apartment buildings, it's a great way to get around the wireless, where you have a bunch of neighbors running wireless and it kind of clogs everything up, a lot of crosstalk. And if you don't have the ability to run an actual wire like we had in my house, we did the same thing. It would be very difficult to run an actual physical line from one side of the house to the other. So we did, EOP, and it's fantastic.
So as we stated, Soho means small office or home office router. A multifunctional router. It contains usually a router, a switch, a gateway, a bridge, a DHCP server, wireless access points, and some of them even have firewall, including and providing NAT translation for internal devices. Obviously, to be able to facilitate any small business to be able to use the actual router's IP to be able to NAT internally to an actual server. Hence, getting a public IP without actually physically being on the internet. Does anyone have a question in reference to what a router, a switch, a gateway, a bridge is? Any of them? Okay, we have masters of the network. As for steps for installing the actual Soho routers, you have to obviously plan and accordingly to be able to identify where you're going to be physically installing this and how you're going to be configuring this router. Basically, obviously, an amount of hosts and or LAN that you have, we will create the actual network based on obviously the size of the LAN. What does that mean? The LAN is the inclusive of the intranet. Therefore, if you have multiple facilities that you want to have in one big, large LAN, which would be your intranet, and they will all contain the exact same, obviously, range. For large businesses, as we said before, usually you would use the 10 dot, which is the class A. For medium businesses, you would use what private address in class B. Anyone remember my dyslexia joke? 127 is loopback, therefore private is?
You mean like class B?
Yeah, class B, private address is?
Private address 128 to 191.
That is the range. And which one is the private that I can use?
0 to 127 or 0 to 126.
That's still class A.
I believe the private one is
private or
169 and 172.
Yes, 169 is APIPA, only used by APIPA, Microsoft solution for
Oh, okay.
if your DHCP server fails. And then 172.16.0.0 up to 172.31.255.255 is a usable range within the class B. And then we learn that if it is a small business, we could use, which most of you have in your house, is a 192. And if anybody caught on yesterday, did anybody see what my IP address was in my house? on purpose, I reconfigured my router. And on top of it, I still find it cute that a lot of these routers and the SIDs, they still broadcast, instead of putting the SID, they actually put their MAC address. So it makes it much easier for me to look up the manufacturer and look up the default password. And obviously what type of encryption they may be using, but that's besides the point. I used a 10 dot something on purpose to make sure, because most likely if they want to statically try to go and configure themselves, I did not leave the default 192.168 on my router. That's obviously part of a security that you can do, is change the actual default IP range that it usually comes with. As for the configuration of it, you have obviously in these Soho routers, they have an access point. You can choose the channels that you want to use, be the 1, 6, or 11, or if it's the other 5. Anyone remember what's those? Oh, actually, nobody knows those. Never mind. We'll get to those. I believe they'll show us those eventually. 1, 6, and 11. And the other ones actually have a much more broader range. It's 151, and I forgot the rest, somewhere in there. In here, the Soho routers for stepping. Obviously, we need to locate exactly where we're going to put this. Usually, it will be placed wherever the demarcation is. The demarcation is where telco will terminate their connection into the facility. From there, any demarcation extension must be done by the internal IT. Therefore, if the actual telco is on the first floor and your business is on the second floor, any demarcation extension is on you. In these cases, if it is small enough or in your house, you might know exactly where that cable modem comes in or wherever the DSL connection is, and you could just go ahead and simply just put it near to there. The majority of the cases, you want to put it centralized so it could be able to facilitate the actual IDF locations. The more centralized your MDF is, obviously, the easier it is to be able to create your IDFs from there. Therefore, and cheaper usually. Questions? Doubts? Hopefully we change, obviously, we power up these things, change their actual default passwords, ID, and or, as I stated, ID range. We're able to obviously update the firmware. Usually we want to do that, make sure it's up to date. Before we even put these puppies on the network, make sure they have the latest and greatest firmware or whatever, if it's Cisco, whatever other type of security updates it requires. As for your SID, make sure you change any default SID. As for the SID, usually it says who they are, and that's not a very smart thing. You could obviously stop broadcasting that actual SID, and it won't say the actual name, but it's up to you. Either which way, it just makes it a little bit harder, but it's not obviously where it actually hides you. If they're actually listening to the network, they can actually be capturing because it is going wireless, and they can see that SID going across. It's just not broadcasting saying I'm here. Questions? Doubts? Okay. Next one here. As for your actual channels on the routers, as we mentioned, the 2.4 gigahertz has the 1 through 11 in the United States. To be able to avoid any interference, the standard is to use the 1, 6, and 11. And this obviously will avoid the actual crosstalk. Any questions? I could read each single bullet point, but that would be facetious. Questions or doubts, please? Did I get disconnected? I must have got disconnected. Anybody there?
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm alive. MAC filtering. Now, this puppy is what they consider security through obscurity. Although obviously it is a first line of defense of mitigating any hacker to come onto the network. Obviously, for those that may already know, you could actually spoof your MAC address. Hence, if you know what MAC address can get on the network, you can actually just change your MAC address to that MAC address. Oh, sorry, excuse me. And poof, you're on the network. But obviously, that does stop all your little script kiddies from being able to get in. Usually, those people are not sophisticated to understand what those little softwares are given to be able to do, so they won't be able to figure out that they can actually mimic anything else. MAC filtering is obviously tedious because now you have to actually specify every single given MAC address that's able to talk on this LAN. Questions? You're I wish, dude, there's every time Marvin, and he may be laughing back there. I can't see him, but he knows I hate this slide. This has got to be the worst invention I ever saw in my life.
Man,
As I said,
this is a technological marvel right here.
I know. This is the beautiful thing. So we have WEP, even up to WEP Enterprise. You can set the WEP Enterprise on the actual Soho routers. Now, this puppy right here, this puppy is beautiful. This guy actually facilitates the process and eases my wife's torture. Had I actually turned that on, and actually, if she knew that she could turn that on, she could actually press that button and she would not actually have to put that long password that she obviously is never going to remember. This actually facilitates the process, and it's just as similar as getting a Bluetooth connection where it goes and you actually giggle, you get a little says that, hey, can you put this pin to obviously confirm that you want to get in? Here's the number, put it in. Would you like to come in? That's as simple as you get. After you do that, it will configure exactly the WEP configurations or WAP or whatever WPA, WPA2, or WEP, whatever you have configuration onto that device. Oh, by the way, if there's anybody else nearby, they'll get the exact same message, letting them know that it's a free-for-all. Questions or doubts on this beautiful invention?
So it's not so beautiful considering how if someone is
This is
No, you
great
don't
for
like it at all.
people that believe that it is a great invention. For the people that are lazy and really,
WPS has been corrupted now, and it's been completely and totally hacked. It is not a safe feature whatsoever now. Not even when you push the button. It's not just the button. It's period. WPS is not safe.
Yeah, it's that's what I'm saying. That's why I hate this slide. This basically circumvents the whole security of the encryption of WEP, WPA, WPA2, or WPA2 Enterprise, or any other flavors that you have. It completely circumvents it. It says that it uses it, but it circumvents it.
Chris, I was being sarcastic. It's frowned upon to press the button. You already pointed out a lot of different ways and why, but if you think it through, if you're able to just press a button,
it's worse. It's worse than that. You don't even have to press the button. It's been completely hacked.
That's what I'm saying is after you know what the number is, you're in. So therefore, even if I don't press the button, if I know the number, I'm in.
There's ways of getting that number even without having been around. I could go to a machine I could go to a network that has WPS enabled, and there are hacking programs that will find that number and give it to me.
Because it's only a certain length. That is correct. And a lot of them, those sophisticated ones, are able to figure out, again, because of the MAC address, who is the vendor. Cisco, Linksys, who created this. And again, they're in because they know exactly the back door. They already created something that got in. Where there's a will, there's a way. And this, my friend, is as lazy I will not get. When it's security, I am never lazy when it comes to security, and I will not play with this. The first thing you should do is disable this. Even if you think it isn't, you go and check and ensure that the actual WPS is completely disabled. That's enough of my sales slogan and useful tidbit of WPS. Just know what it is and how it helps you. DMZ. Obviously, hopefully, we remember that a demilitarized zone is the area of the network that's visible to the public. This is usually where you will place your public servers, web servers, email servers, and the plethora of servers that are accessible to the internet. Obviously, at the same time, creating a barrier from anyone that was able to get into there to be able to come in to the internal LAN. At the same time, it does allow the LAN people to be able to access the demilitarized zone with obviously safety procedures in place. You would always think of the demilitarized zone as, I believe, it's Swiss or Sweden, right? Just pretend that you can't come in with weapons there. You could only go to, I don't know about North Korea or South Korea, but we could always overthink that. The the actual demilitarized zone says exactly where and who you can come to visit. Therefore, you can only go there from the internet. The same thing. There's a firewall that's impeding you to even the land from being malicious to that demilitarized zone. It does give you access to those given areas. Hence, keeping the actual that area as secure as possible and at the same time not allowing it to bleed into the internal network. Any questions?
I think this is a reiteration. We mentioned it in another part of
Yeah, this is a function that he has. The Soho router has that function inside. These are all the features that he has inside. Next feature that he has, this Soho router nowadays has DHCP. So it has the server capabilities of doing DHCP. It will assign an IP to the subnet. It's also able to do NAT. NAT to physically also ensure that even if you want people to come in, obviously, since you have only maybe one public IP, you can always use that public IP. And obviously, you create a NAT table on the router that will translate whenever he gets that packet asking for maybe port 80. That's the internal IP I want you to forward it to. And then it will send it to the actual server. The server is completely oblivious of what is going on. All he did, the router is ask for certain information. So what does the server say? Okay, here you go. Now, since he stored that NAT translation of what was going on and that current conversation, he is able to basically, again, send it out using his public IP to be able to obviously deliver the packet out to the internet. As for quality of service, as the name says, it is able to also, not all of them, obviously, this is the features that's the ones depending what how expensive you get them, they are able to actually do quality of service. Quality of service is similar to what MPLS, or basically what MPLS can do, which basically can guarantee an actual bandwidth to a certain actual application, be HTTP, HTTPS, voice over IP, whatever you want. You could choose exactly how much of the bandwidth you want to guarantee. What's amazing also in QoS, you can actually stop certain things from our applications for talking. That's how you could actually control that within QoS itself. For instance, if you wanted to stop people from being able to play with Xbox, or I forgot what server, there was the Doom server, was it? There was, so you could actually set quality of service to go and look out for that, and it will stop it completely. Or you could actually specify quality of service to only allow certain amount of computers. In other words, you would actually specify these that could actually do video conferencing, for instance. So it would actually go and look for all of those type of units once again, using the MAC address information to be able to guarantee that those devices are able to actually do video voice conferencing while all other computers cannot. This puppy obviously is very sophisticated, depending again on the actual device and the how deep it can go. As for universal plug and play, that's exactly what it means. You should be able to install with ease, and a lot of them you should be able to configure them with ease. They usually have also capabilities to get in through a web interface if you're not going directly. Firewall, exactly what it means. It has an internal firewall device. Obviously, these things are great because now I don't have to purchase all these other devices. At the same time, that is a very, very weak line of defense because now you just put all the eggs into one proverbial basket. Obviously, if you don't have the money, this is great. Now I can actually set up all my firewall settings inside this router. Any questions or doubts? Lastly, here we have the capabilities and some of these to be able to go ahead and connect to a VPN concentrator. And some of them even have the capabilities to actually be able to download software so that you can be able to use VPN to connect to that internal network. You put it onto that laptop, the software, you configure that the actual information on the router, and you're up and running. Remember, these are all in one devices. Usually in large corporations, this would be separate. Questions? As for your installation issues, usually, as always, go to the documentation either on the actual website of the provider to be able to facilitate the process. Usually they have the FAQs in there and or even a little friendly GUI guy who pretends that he's actually a person who eventually becomes a real person if he's unable to answer the actual questions. As for your SID, as I mentioned many of times, please, oh please, please change your SID and password. As I stated before, the default SID is the same for all the routers of that given manufacturer and model. So is the actual password. That is the line of defense that we should do immediately. Second thing I would recommend is obviously changing the scope of the IP range. Be that you want to maybe use a class C, but obviously I have plenty of class C. I don't have to leave it on that 192.168.1.0 network. I can change it to anything else if I still want to use the 192.168, but just don't use the default IP range. To be able to obviously test things and ensure if you're able to connect to it via the Wi-Fi or the Ethernet, you should be able to use the ping command. The ping command, obviously, with the IP will allow you to be able to identify if you're able to reach that given device. As for the physical connection, when you're in the Ethernet cable, it does have a little friendly light that indicates that it's obviously flickering back and forth. As we mentioned before, we have a loopback plug that facilitates that process. In case if we think there's a failure in the cable, we can put the loopback plug in that given port, acting like if it's actually connected to a given device. Hence, if that card is bad, then it will not flicker. If the card is good, the little light starts to flicker. Another way that I can confirm that everything's actually configured correctly, drivers are working fine, is if I just ping the loopback address. That would tell me that obviously all my configurations are fine and that the card up to that given port is working fine because it actually sent a ping out and came back into it internally. Questions or doubts? Another feature we should use is the IP config/all, which gives us all of the information. IP config will only give me my current IP address, subnet mask, and my default gateway. The /all gives me all configuration of all cards, including the DNS server and or maybe the DHCP server or whatever information is configured on that given card and other cards. Everybody's okay? Okay. Another thing that we could do, since everyone's always used to using the .1 as a default gateway, we could obviously change the IP address of the router. Hence, obviously, once again, security through obscurity, you could either hide it, but if they actually get on the network, they're on the network. But it does make it difficult. As for one or the last one within that network, is the one that we usually use. So the first usable IP, since 0 I can't use, would be 1 in that first network. And depending where that given network ends, then obviously 1 less than that broadcast address in the majority of cases on a regular default base would be 254. Questions or doubts? Common connectivity issues. Windows loves to give you icon and usually it's a big red X letting you know that there's a problem, either that the cable itself has been disconnected or it doesn't see the cable itself. Also, if it is connected and it's unable to actually get an IP address, it will configure itself and let you know that something went wrong and it was unable to actually obtain an IP address. One of the key things when we're actually going and creating these static IPs, specifically in these small sites, it is tedious and we must control it. There's nothing in that DHCP server that's going to be registering and storing this. Only the DHCP portion is where the DHCP server is actually controlling releases and ensuring that no one else gets that exact same IP. When it comes to actual static IPs, you as a network administrator must have a database or some sort of table that contains the actual IPs that are being statically used on a given network and ensure that it doesn't get used by anyone else. Next here we have is limited local connectivity. Usually that happens when the actual ISP is having a lot of issues. And believe it or not, in these Soho routers, a lot of good trick is, just like any other computer, turn that puppy off and on, and you'll be surprised how it'll come right back up. Sometimes it just runs out of buffer memory or it just needs a restart. Whenever you see that limited or local connectivity, it's usually the access point is able to obviously get to the actual router, but it's unable to actually exit. Therefore, hence the word limited or local connectivity. Lastly, the intermittent connectivity is obviously in reference to the actual wireless again, and most likely we would see that as we saw in one of the questions when you're a little bit too out of range and or if there's obviously cross bleed of channels and you're on the same SID. I'm sorry, on the same, SID and password, obviously. So everybody's on the same network and everybody's on the same channel. That will create problems when you're jumping from one antenna to the other because it can't figure out who I need to talk to. Since the channel is the same and they never lost signal, I don't need to reconnect to any other MAC address. Hence, a drop packet, because you're next to that access point, and my name is not Joe, my name is Diego. Therefore, I'm ignoring you. You're not talking to me. And that's basically what happens. By the time it gets to Joe, he's hard of hearing. He wasn't able to hear the actual conversation, and obviously, hence, intermittent connectivity. Questions? Doubts? As for Windows, it does have its own features, just like anything. If you wish to troubleshoot it, you could obviously use its automated features if you're unable to figure it out yourself to see if it is able to determine it. Otherwise, you would need to obviously remember and recall that ping is your friend. You also have trace route to be able to figure out if it's not in your facility, where in the route the problem is. And there is path ping also. Depending which of the three you use, they all three use the ping command, but obviously path ping and trace route gives a more sophisticated report, depending which one you prefer. As for wireless common errors, believe it or not, whenever a user tells you that they're having issues, the first thing we should ask them is ensure that they actually have that little dip switch obviously on. Sometimes they turn that off themselves and or they put themselves with the manual airplane mode or the Wi-Fi turned off manually. The other one is the RF interference, which we mentioned many times already. We could have interference with other antennas who are broadcasting on the exact same channels. Could be obviously, there may be that we are also close to other equipment that we shouldn't be. Hence, anything that's creating a big electric magnetic field, like your actual fluorescent lights and or your famous microwave. Other things that we could be having problems with users where they're entering the actual wrong access keys. So that unfortunately usually may be a problem. And a lot of these times, this is again a small, obviously site. You may want to just control it yourself and not give out that key. So you would have to then obviously make sure that only IT controls it and ensure that it's stored in the right place. Any questions or a doubt? All right. What should we do? We must make sure, obviously, what the problem is and where it is. We need to be able to connect. If we believe it is a website, we need to confirm it's the website. Try, obviously, different websites and just in case. As I mentioned before, make sure that you have a valid IP address. You'll be able to do the command in Windows, which is called ipconfig. You have ifconfig within Linux for your physical network card and iwconfig for your wireless. You can obviously always check first from the bottom up when it comes to the TCP/IP and you're talking and looking at a network issue. You must start from the bottom up, from the physical layer, and ensure that you test the physical layer. Then you can proceed to the next layer on up. If you're testing applications or software, you start from the application layer and you work on your way down to the actual physical layer of the computer. Does that make sense? Yes or no? We're looking at the least intrusive methods of testing troubleshooting. When you're talking about OSs, software, anything like that, you start from the top down, which is the application layer, and you go on down towards the actual physical layer. If you're talking about network, you would start at the physical layer, which is the least intrusive, and then you would move on up. Hence, you should ping on the local host. That is obviously the closest and the least intrusive to ensure that actually everything is configured correctly. Then I will go to the router, which is my next hop, my next node. From there, I will then maybe ping the known website like google.com or the known actual DNS server which now I know what that IP is, and I don't have to worry about, is my DNS server working? I can actually ping 8.8.8.8. That's the Google DNS server, guaranteed to be up 24/7, 365 days a year. Therefore, if that guy is down, you are most likely the one down. Questions or doubts?
Whenever Google goes down, that DNS wouldn't work anymore, right?
They have a server farm of DNS servers who respond to that exact same IP address. And the IP address is actually natted to what they call a load balancer. This load balancer does exactly that. He has every single farm under him. Every single server in the farm under his control. So he's really the one that's representing 8.8.8. At that moment, if any DNS server that's in this farm goes down, he can automatically wake up the next DNS server on the farm and start utilizing him. He always has a minimum of 3 servers or more that he can talk to. You could always have it talking to all of them, but it's all depending on, again, your acceptance to risk and how you want to configure these things. But for Google, they have a farm which will respond always. Even if that DNS server that you just went into goes down, any other server is ready to actually respond.
But even in the recent DDoS attack that brought down Gmail and YouTube for a couple hours, I think it was like about a month or so ago, even in that attack, the DNS server never went down.
So that might have been the confusion. Good point there. They were hacked, but that was a different server. It's not the same server. You could see how strong these things are. Although they have a big weakness, which is that trust factor, but they are extremely locked down to the point that the actual DNS server, the real DNS server, the guy that really is the guy, he's never on the network. He is turned on, and then he tells the children what is it that they had to do. He gets turned off, and they go whatever and create whatever configurations they want, and then they'll go and turn it on whenever they want. That master server is usually not always on the network. The childs are always on the network. Depending on how sophisticated, obviously, we're talking about your company is. Any questions or doubts? Yeah. As we've seen before, your 802.11 standards, you have your A, your B, your G, your N, and A, C, and the years that they came out, the bands that they actually play with, and the distances and speeds. My favorite part about that distance, and it looks like if they're actually selling a car here, it's just all I need is that guy to talk really, really fast. They have a little asterisk, which they call line of sight. Can someone explain to me why line of sight may be an issue?
Like with all radio waves, if you got an obstruction in front and it can't penetrate, you're not going to get that signal. So line of sight's best because there's no obstructions.
Agreed. The other thing in reference to any type of wireless, if for those that might know what a prism is, whenever any type of wireless goes through a wall, the radio signal is coming in, but it actually splits the signal into many weaker signals. Hence,
Diffusion.
That
right?
obstruction creates that actual issue. And the more obstruction, the weaker the signal gets.
Well,
Any questions, doubts? So whenever you see you're having problem with wireless, first is obviously antenna placement. What type of antenna do I have also? What's the strength, its placement and strength? So that line of sight is a key failure for wireless in these operations. A lot of people get frustrated and they go and they buy all this wireless equipment, and every time the container that comes from ocean seems to be giving them a problem because it's solid steel. And every time they go and try to scan in there, nobody can scan. It's solid steel. How are you gonna penetrate it? Didn't matter what humongous antenna they put outside the building. It wasn't getting through the actual truck trailer. Hence, in that case, antenna placement was key. What was cute and what we were able to create for as a solution was that every time they were going to go and scan, there was like a little, it looks like a basketball court, a little frame that would actually come out and actually come down, and it had Yagi antennas pointing straight into the container.
Damn.
Where there's a will, there's a way. That was the only way, because in fact, since the actual ceiling of this warehouse was, I don't know, it was over 3 stories high. It was real large warehouse. You could have about, maybe I think it was like 9 racks up. It was ridiculous, that warehouse that they had. It was a city block. That's how ridiculous it was for Intel. Either which way, the antenna, that wireless antenna that was all the way up there, there was no way its angle could actually go inside. So we actually had to come up with that. And the outside antenna wasn't getting through the actual container. Any questions or doubts on their little car slogan and the asterisk of line of sight?
I have a question regarding the 802.11 wireless standards.
Mhm.
Why is it that 802.11b has a max data rate of 11 megabits, while 802.11a is 54? Is it because of the gigahertz, or is it something else?
During that technology, they both came out on the same day, and I would have to yield towards the frequency itself and its capabilities at its time.
Okay.
If someone has a true, I'm only going as my logical guess, I know that the 5 gigahertz is a bigger channel frequency. So I'm only taking that wild guess into play.
That's exactly correct, Diego. I remember problems with 2.4 and switching to 5 gigahertz and using different technologies across that spectrum. But what you said is exactly correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the only reason I know is just like he said, is I hit or stubbed my toe into this situation. And since those were the only 2 in the time, and since I know a little bit about radio waves, I know that bandwidth is a little bit bigger than this one.
And as it stands, to piggyback on what Diego's saying, 5G is what you would want your device to be on if there is no obstructions. But 2.4 can extend a lot further, but it, of course, that extension comes with the loss of the speed. So that 5G, you want to be in the same room. You don't want any walls. And a lot of companies are setting up their modems where it switched between 5G and 2.4 seamlessly. You don't even notice it. It's just doing it on its own because they put everything together so you don't miss out on the faster technology that's available. But when you go like upstairs, it'll effortlessly jump over to 2.4 and keep and stay connected.
Now,
another thing to
go ahead.
I can talk.
Another thing to kind of be aware of 802.11g is backwards compatible with B.
Correct.
With a caveat. There is a big caveat on that. When you put a B device on a G network, it will slow everything on that network down to B.
You're as good as your slowest link. Everything goes down. Everybody has to slow down. Remember, if not, everybody's going to be talking to him like a very fast chipmunk, and he's going to be talking. Hence, in digital world, that does not work. I'm sorry. Someone I think had I think I heard somebody. They had a question.
Okay, I had a question.
Okay.
Wouldn't there be an upgrade to 5G in the next couple of years that will have speed with distance, or is that never possible anymore?
Well, let's look at the radio waves. Look what's amazing about radio waves. In reference to those, again, as old as me, they may remember AM radio waves is the original radio waves that is possible. They'll also remember that AM can travel huge, vast distances because of the fact that it is, and the waves that it's creating, it's oscillating at a different frequency. It could actually go more. Now, FM is a stronger at short distances. FM radio is what we use now. It's much crisper, much cleaner. So is obviously the digital channels, obviously. But let's just talk only about the AM and the FM. Hence, now FM can only go so far. If you try to go more than most likely past a given county, that FM radio station you lose. Amazingly, we talk, if I recall correctly, I'm not 100%, we're still doing it, but we were talking to some of these far distance, like the ones in Mars, through AM radio waves. Unless if they change something. I know at one point we were talking to the Mars through AM radio waves. That's how far that guy can go. And we transmit.
Radios?
AM can transfer it as long as it has line of sight, it keeps on going. That I'm aware of. I believe even the Puerto Rico one, that Puerto Rico one that screams out or listens, it's listening to AM waves. That sophisticated thing that we've seen in the movies, like in James Bond, usually in those weird fights, looks like a humongous satellite in the middle of the floor.
Oh, so that's AM waves. All right.
Yeah,
I believe so. They travel very long distances. Go ahead.
But to Jose's question about later technologies, there's actually Wi-Fi 6 out. It's called 802.11ax with speeds up to right now 1.3 gigabytes. I don't know about the distance though.
Yeah, they don't get into that one on A+, but it is there.
Yes,
if you go on to Net Plus, it will be there.
Correct. So that does exist. As for the test, these are the ones that they want you to learn. Good call. Any other questions? So hopefully by now we should be able to compare and contrast the internet connection types and their features, compare and contrast the Wi-Fi networking standards and their encryption types, explain the role of a router and describe the differences between a wired and a wireless one, describe how to install, configure, and deploy a Soho router, identify your common pitfalls when installing them, identify the actual common problems that may come up with them, and lastly, describe how to solve some of these common problem issues. Any questions or doubts specifically on this here? Everyone okay? So, who can tell me if a Soho router, when you connect to it, it can actually assign you an IP? Is that a true statement? Can a Soho router do that?
I'm gonna guess and say no because it's not a DHCP server. I don't know for sure. Actually, you can assign yourself the router. I mean, the IP address through the router software, probably.
Correct. A Soho router or a small office home router has all those features that we just talked about in this presentation. As for a Cisco managed router, those big puppies that we saw that are not all-in-ones, those have the information on who to forward the packet to.
Right.
That is a router which only is a router, compared to a Soho router has a lot of devices inside of it, including obviously being a router itself, an access point, a switch. I can make a hat. I can make a pterodactyl. No, nobody. Okay. Airplane, for those that maybe remember Airplane.
That's a good movie.
Any questions, doubts? Please, oh please. Questions? Nothing here? Anybody want to do a lab?